Greetings. Oh, I don't have a camera on, but I do now. Hello, everybody. I am Andre Riley, the Director of Communications for Baltimore City Public Schools. And I want to welcome you to our latest virtual town hall meeting where we discuss happenings related to reopening, our progress of virtual learning, and anything else related that you need to know as your school district moves forward towards providing a quality education for our students. In the background with me today are a cadre of experts, including our CEO, Dr. Sonia Santelises, who will be on camera in short order. But in the meantime, I just want to welcome you all. We know we started a little bit late tonight, but we want to get this just right for you. And I think we're going to do that. So without further ado, I'm just going to jump into it because we're running a little bit behind. So I'm going to ask my colleague to put our first slide up so we could talk about yesterday's announcement. We had a whole lot of information to share. So I think it's best to review what happened yesterday. So let's start with the basic stuff. As the headline on the graphic implies, we are moving to expand our number of small group in-person learning opportunities. Well, what does small group in-person learning opportunities mean? It means we're opening up select school buildings and bringing together small groups of students that are interested, where their families are interested in an in-person learning opportunity. But it's just not for folks who are interested. We also have several groups that we are moving to, I don't like the word target, but that we're focusing on to bring back. This includes special education students, English as a second language students, students where we've not seen great activity from them in the virtual environment, meaning they may not have been logging in as often as we would expect, or we're otherwise just not in touch with them. We're looking to offer them the opportunity to come back. Now, for the remainder of the first semester starting in November, we're going to offer opportunities at approximately 25 schools. Why the word approximately? Because as this thing develops, we could ultimately add more and above that. But right now, 25 is the working number. But we'll have more to share on that in the future weeks. So back to small group in-person learning. What does this mean for you? Well, we know there have been lots of questions about when are we going hybrid, when are students coming back in full. This is kind of a bridge as we build capacity as an organization to provide those small group opportunities while recognizing the environment that we're in. We're in the middle of an unprecedented pandemic. So it wouldn't make sense just to bring everybody back, and the health experts are not necessarily endorsing that. So when we have these small group in-person opportunities, there are ways to focus on students that really need that in-person option to help them get over the hump and continue to learn, as well as for families who are just plain interested in the opportunity. So on the right side of the graphic, you see some key points from yesterday's announcement. We sent you a really long letter yesterday, and for some folks, it may have been a little bit overwhelming. So if you leave with these points, you'll have a much better sense of where we are at with small group in-person learning. Step one, and this is paramount. Participation is not mandatory. I've seen comments in our engagement platforms, that being social media, or when they reach out to me directly, saying, you're not going to force me to go back. Well, we agree with you. We're not. We're providing opportunities for families that want to or that need an in-person learning opportunity. We still expect that the vast majority of our school district will participate in virtual learning. The numbers are just going to bear that out. There are far more students participating in virtual learning than there are seats for small group in-person learning. So if you want to continue with virtual learning, nothing changes. Same schedule, same quality, and there's no penalty for staying in that space. So we want to be absolutely clear on that, because that seems to be a little bit of a gray area for people. And for those students that want to move to in-person learning, we'll go to our next bullet. Our schools will lead these in-person learning opportunities. What that means is we'll ask them over the period of the next couple of weeks to prepare to host students back on select campuses across the organization, across the school district. Those schools will reach out to you directly, so you won't see a big notification from the district like you do many times when we have major announcements. If your school is offering in-person learning opportunities, you'll be able to access them by working directly with the schools. We'll use all of our platforms, phone calls, emails. Schools will have meetings and other means to determine who is interested in those in-person learning opportunities, so we have the right resources allocated to serve that group. But again, participation is not mandatory. This is only for folks who opt in to the program, or basically you choose to do it. Third bullet, and really quick, we're focusing on students in key groups, and I touched upon this right at the beginning of my comments. Those groups include early or young learners. We're talking about our pre-K ones, our babies. We have students with disabilities. Those are students in the special education program. English language learners, homeless students, and students who cannot participate consistently in virtual classes for a variety of reasons. And again, this doesn't mean that if you have a student in one of these categories that you're automatically opted in. Back to point number one, this is mandatory. We're just saying we're offering opportunities for you if you have students in those groups. This fourth bullet, I think, is the most appropriate of all of our bullets. Nothing is final as far as the list of schools right now. That work is in progress. Our goal yesterday was to set the table for you, to make sure that you understood where we're going and how it could impact you. So over the next couple of weeks, as I mentioned, we will be having more, you'll hear more and more from our schools as they are prepared to roll these things out. But each program focuses on the students that are currently enrolled in that school. So if you attend Andre Riley Elementary and your student is enrolled there and you want to go to Sonia Santelisa's Elementary, well, only students at Andre's school can go. So there's no bouncing around the district in that regard. And I said the fourth bullet was most important, but nah, that's not right. The last bullet is most important. Safety first. We are not going to put anyone at risk. I've seen comments related to, oh, you're putting my students at risk. You're going to force us to do something where I don't feel comfortable, or I have health needs that preclude me from wanting to be in an in-person environment. We're right there with you. There's agreement there. We're working with health experts, including the Baltimore City Health Department, and we built a great set of guidelines that we're using to operate our small in-person learning opportunities. And if you've had any interactions with our student learning centers, you're seeing those things already. You're seeing mandatory face masks across the district, except for right now while I'm in a district building, because I'm talking to you. We have daily health screening and temperature checks. That means before you even come into the building, we're going to take your temperature. We're going to ask you a few questions to make sure that you don't have those easily identifiable health concerns that would pose a risk to others. We clean and we disinfect. We clean and we disinfect. That's huge. We bought a lot of equipment for that. And on top of that, I want you guys to go on YouTube and watch our video that we just posted today about Beachfield. You'll get a really excellent example of how we clean our buildings. And finally, small class sizes. One of the great things about small group in-person learning is that we're not bringing back everybody at once. No, we're bringing back small clusters. It's easier to manage and you're more likely to keep people safe. So that is a recap of yesterday in 5 bite-sized bullets. And with that said, I'm going to bring a very special person to the stage, Dr. Sonia Santelises, your CEO and mine too. Hi, Doc, how are you doing?
I'm fine, Andre. How are you, sir?
A little bit out of breath, but we got through it.
You did well.
All right, Doc, you saw the first half, and before we start talking about health and safety protocols, is there anything that I missed, anything that you want to highlight regarding, what we're hearing from our parents and from the community?
Sure. I think a couple things, Andre, that, and really it's just emphasizing some of what you've already said. The first thing I would emphasize is that we are prioritizing students in some of the most vulnerable or challenging categories. So young people who are not logging on, some of our earliest learners who we know developmentally really need more interaction. Some of our English language learners and visiting some of those classes that are already in place. And so part of what we're doing is really in these early days focusing there. That's the driver. For this, we just know that for many families, virtual learning is working. It works based on where that family's readiness is to re-enter school, as well as work schedules. We even have some families who are saying, you know, my child's thriving in a virtual learning environment. So I want to emphasize the point that this is not mandatory for families to have to select an option. The second piece that I would emphasize really is the investment in the cleaning and safety protocols. We have had in-person experience since the summer. We do have protocols in place that have been developed in collaboration with the broad range of health professionals. So some of the protocols really have been fine-tuned at this point, both in terms of what we're doing in terms of cleaning protocols, the investment that we've made in making sure that, you know, we can address some of the concerns that I think we've heard rightly about making sure there's an availability of supplies and making sure there's appropriate PPE. And so again, our in-person learning experience from the summer, from our student learning centers, is actually enabling us to be able to really have kind of more robust safety processes in place. The other piece is that I would just emphasize again that we are targeting, as you said, Andre, we're targeting 25 schools. When I had conversations and Chief Davis with school leaders, they were clear that they felt as if this would be much easier to manage if we were talking about home schools. And so, Andre, your example was a great one. Although I chuckled at Sonia Santelisa's Elementary, and people would definitely be leaving Sonia Santelisa's Elementary to go to Andre Riley Elementary. But it was a fabulous example, again, of how we are slow walking this, and we are watching the health indicators. We are consulting with Dr. DeRaza, with experts at Johns Hopkins, at University of Maryland, at Morgan, who have just been invaluable to us on the health advisory committee. So I would emphasize those. The real target here are the large numbers of students that we still have that are not connecting, that are not being served well. And any of those families, again, are not going to be, forced to take that option. But we've heard from many families, and I was out at a site today where they are hearing from many families who, for example, want kindergartners or pre-Kers to come back, or some principals, who are saying families that just are not able to manage the virtual space in a way that's really meeting their child's needs. So that's our target. We really want to be able to provide those families with robust options and not just one singular option across the district, and really build on the learning we've had over the past few months. So that's what I would say, but you did a great job in the overview, Andre.
Thank you, Dr. Santelises. And the audience is getting a little restless, so I'm going to go through the second slide. Really, I'm going to speed this up. So Abby, cue it up.
I don't need to speak on the second slide. You can do the second slide and we can move along. That's fine.
All right. So everyone, we've seen questions throughout our audience. In fact, I see them from you right now. You're wondering, how are we going to keep your kids safe? How are we going to keep our staff members safe if you work for us? Totally, you're on the right track. That's our goal. We want everyone, as a headline suggests, to be safe. bringing us together does no good if we put people in harm. And your school district has no desire to do that, not just for yourself, but for us as well. So 5 really quick bullets, just to give you an understanding of what our procedures look like. First, as I mentioned in the last slide, temperature and health screenings. No one is allowed to enter our buildings, including the screeners themselves, without having their temperature checked and being asked. It should be 3 health screening questions. So you'll know there's more than one. Let's start with that. The second one's a big one because I've heard, will you have enough PPE? In fact, I think I just posted posted a response from the audience regarding that. Do you have enough PPE? Well, right now we have at least $2.4 million worth of PPE and cleaning supplies. That includes masks, desk shields, face shields, cleaning products. You can see a full list of them there. Now, this doesn't mean that everybody will have let's say, face shields. There's some division on how they'll be shared per our health standard operating procedures. However, I want to put that number out there because we have a lot. We were proactive in purchasing our PPE and cleaning supplies before the rush began. We foreshadowed, well, we didn't foreshadow and that's not the correct word, but we prepared properly to make sure that we would have what we needed. So 2.4 million, if you're wondering just how much PPE we have. The third one, training and enforcement of the rules. In my other role with the district, which is answering questions from various community interests, folks have noted that in some of our campuses, you've seen that folks don't always have their mask on, or maybe they're wearing it improperly, or maybe a student may adjust their mask, and for a short period of time, it might not be on correctly. Well, this is an ongoing learning process. But one thing you're seeing, and I want you to take away from this section is, we're working to encourage each other to do the right thing. Yes, we have hard and fast rules and procedures, and we expect anyone in our buildings to follow them. We are training our staff members appropriately. However, bottom line, we have to help each other. I can't tell you how many times I will go in a grocery store, my mask starts to come down, and I have a 19-year-old and a 20-year-old, and they are quick to remind me, pick your mask up, put your mask up. So I'm like, because they don't want me to bring anything home. So we're working with that. When someone's not in the right, we'll help them get in the right. But there are rules which you can access by visiting BaltimoreCitySchools.org. The fourth one, classroom pods. As we start to bring students back in these small in-person learning groups, classrooms, they're called classroom pods as a technical term. We separate one class from another. So you have a first grade class A over here and B over here. And they don't intermingle from the instructional experience, even out into their free time and their recess time. You never come together. That way, if someone in a classroom, whether it be a student or teacher, is experiencing COVID-like symptoms, or Lord forbid, somebody tests positive, it's contained to that pod or anybody else who's had close contact. And that helps us with the contact tracing, which you see in the last bullet. Classroom pods, they give us a great foundation and they help, I won't say eliminate the risk, but they certainly do reduce it by isolating groups of students. That's terribly important, and it's one of the ways that we're going to keep everyone safe. And that's a really brief overview of the health procedure slide. But because I blew through it pretty quickly, after this meeting, I want you to go to BaltimoreCitySchools.org and visit the health web page. And I guarantee you they'll be there. Why? Because either I'll do it or somebody on this call will do it. So, Dr. Santelises, we now have health procedures that we shared. We have an overview of in-person learning, and I've got a lot of questions. So we're going to just jump into the questions. We know a lot of folks want to hear from us. Dr. Santelises, we'll start with an easy one. If you're still developing your plan, why are you going to start in November? And I think there might be a little bit of clarity that's needed there.
Absolutely. So with regards to still developing the plan, the pieces that are absolutely definitive and the pieces that We actually are in a lot of cases further along with than even some other places, is in a lot of the safety protocols, in a lot of the procedures, in the organization, those safety pieces. We also know, for example, from some of our work this summer and our work with student learning centers, target groups of families that are most desirous of an in-person option, what that looks like. The remainder of the planning is actually working with school leaders to determine whether they have the critical mass of families at their school that would warrant opening, and then getting a sense of where we are with staffing at each school. So that planning is what is taking place between now and November. So what I would say is we actually do have a good amount of planning in place. It's why we have actually for quite some time had very detailed SOPs. Andre and his team, standard operating procedures, my apologies. And so we are working to put those in place. I think the pieces that we still need to input into the plan really have to do with what families are deciding. So I think that's an important distinction. The pieces of the plan that are the most important in terms of ensuring that families can be confident, those pieces are in place. The pieces that we have yet to build out are really going to be dependent on where we are with family demand and where we are with staffing.
Thank you, Dr. Santelises. Now we've got some questions our experts can take. So we'll just keep you around on camera. We'll circle back because we will need you. All right, we have a question regarding custodial staff. Did you hire additional custodial staff? I'm going to bring forth, yes, Dr. Lynette Washington, who took my cue, our Chief Operating Officer, to speak about. Dr. Washington, did we hire additional custodial staff?
Hello, Andre, and good evening, everyone. So the question around custodial staffing is yes. For our SLC sites, we looked at the square footage that's going to be used within our spaces. We also looked at all of our cleaning requirements that we have listed in our SOP, and we provided additional custodial support to be able to keep up with all of the cleaning and managing of the site. So yes, we did.
Thank you, Dr. Washington. I appreciate you. And now, next, Chief John Davis, our Chief Academic Officer. Doc, can you turn your camera off? Hi, Chief Davis. Long time no see.
Andre.
Hi, Chief Davis. We're asked, why doesn't the curriculum seem as rigorous as usual? Do y'all intend to cover all of the material that would be normally covered? So we'll start with the first one. Does the curriculum have the same rigor in a virtual environment, or will it have the same rigor in a small in-person learning environment as we would in a traditional classroom?
It's a great question. Thanks, Andre. First, I would say that the standards, the lessons, the topics that are being covered are the same ones that would have been covered if your child's in the 4th grade, if your child's in the 8th grade, if your child's in the 12th grade. So that rigor is still there. And we're not reducing the curriculum, or we're not trying to ease it up just because we're in the virtual space. At the same time, we do have to acknowledge we are in the virtual space. And so I think covering the same amount of curriculum is going to be a challenge. We've worked really hard with our curriculum partners to make sure we're covering, say, the right standards and the right topics and the right themes, the right readings. So we may not get through everything in a unit, or sometimes we call them modules, but at the same time, we're prioritizing, say, the highest leverage standards, the highest leverage learning that we know needs to be a part of that grade level or that subject. I also think that if a family is not seeing it be quite as rigorous, then we should investigate that, and we should talk that over with the particular school. I can understand that it might not be quite as rigorous, but there should still be writing that occurs. There should be math problems that occur. it should look similar enough that the learning is there. And I think if it isn't with a particular subject, I think the parents got to reach out to the school and kind of figure that out. So I don't want to act like it's just the norm or it's just as easy as it is in brick and mortar. Our teachers and our principals are working really hard for us to make it rigorous. But we also know just life is rigorous right now. And so there's just this balance that I think everyone is really being attuned to. And so I hope that people understand that. But if you don't see your child being challenged at all, that is a conversation you got to have with your school principal and with your teacher, because we are covering the curriculum and we are covering the topics and the units as we normally would.
Chief Davis, thanks a lot, and I will be back to you. Thank you. All right, moving on. I'm going to call our Chief of Staff, Allison Perkins Cohen, who's always been great in these events. Hello, Allison. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
I am fine. We've seen a couple of questions about contact tracing. It kind of piqued some interest. Can you talk a little bit about our efforts in that area?
Yeah. So we have a team in our human capital office who does our contact tracing for us. So we've been doing in-person, the in-person student learning centers now since the end of September, and also in-person learning for special ed sites and for some English language learners. And so in any of those spaces or in our meal sites, if we have an individual who either is confirmed to be COVID or has COVID-like symptoms, the CDC has guidelines about what are COVID-like symptoms. And so in our standard operating procedures, you can see reference to them. And so anybody who has those either has COVID-like symptoms or is determined to be COVID positive, we call in our contact tracers. The individual goes home, the staff or the students go home, and then the contact tracers come in and we'll do contact tracing to ascertain any close contacts. Now for a pod, because as you mentioned in your introductory remarks, Andre, we are using these pod structures, which was again the recommendation of the health of Dr. Duraza and the health department, as well as our health advisory group, and is just generally good practice, the recommended practice across the country, which is that students stay in small learning groups where their interaction is limited or the number of students they're exposed to are the small number of students in that group and the adults in that group. And so when there's either COVID-like symptoms or a confirmed case of COVID, we send the individuals in the pod home until we can either confirm a negative test or until there's a 14-day period. COVID-like symptoms, there is a broad range of them. So that's one thing for people to be aware of too. It's that it includes a range of symptoms that could include symptoms like the common cold, but we take it really seriously. And so even though within that pod, remember too, students are spaced 6 feet apart. So they're 6 feet apart. We have desk shields around their desks. They're all wearing masks. We have ventilation system that Dr. Washington and her team have put in our buildings to make sure that the air is well ventilated. And so we've got the MERV 13 filters in place or air purifiers in rooms, depending on the building. And so with all those pieces in place, it is with an abundance of caution that we're sending the pod home. Because the CDC definition is that you have to send anybody home who's considered a close contact. By the CDC definition, a close contact would be somebody who's within 6 feet of you for 15 minutes or more. The way our pods are set up, that really shouldn't be happening because students are seated more than 6 feet apart, but nonetheless, that pod does go home with anytime anybody has COVID-like symptoms, which could be, pretty mild cold-like symptoms until either the quarantine window passes or until we get a negative test back.
Thank you, Allison. I'm going to keep you here because while you're talking, it just provoked even more questions, which is good. We got a really active audience tonight. Allison, can we talk about metrics for a second? What metrics are we using to judge whether we're reopening our buildings safely? I know through our reopening plan, we have we've identified some metrics that would work, but can you talk about that a little bit in just a second?
I'm sorry. I'm making dinner for my family, so I just had to take that off the stove. So yes, I can.
Oh, thank you, Allison.
So, yeah, if you recall, Andre, we've been having in-person experiences both through the summer school and then also through our meal sites for now since schools closed on March 13th. We had our meal service workers came out first thing and started serving meals to the community immediately. And so we've put together standard operating procedures and really refined this over a long period of time. And so initially, working with our health advisory group and the Baltimore City Health Department, we had to come up with a dashboard to ascertain when it was safe to have students or staff in person and when it wasn't. At that time, there was no metrics or dashboard from the state health department or from the CDC. So we came up with one in partnership with our health advisory group. Since then, the state has developed health metrics that they're advising the state Department of Health is advising for use with schools. So that is what we are using now, since there is now state guidelines on that. And that's I'm sure we have that on our website, but if it's not, we can put it on our website. It's definitely on the state website, but it looks at first the positivity rate. So the rate has to be if it's less than 5%, which ours in the last 7 days is 2.5%. Then you go down, there's kind of two arms of this decision tree. Then you go and you look at the new case rate. And the new case rate, there's a range, there's a continuum of different levels of in-person experiences that you could have, depending on the rate that you have. So we are kind of right in the middle right now with 11.4 cases per 100,000 people in the last 7 days. That's a 7-day average. And so that puts us in the middle of that continuum from the state, which means that we are in a position to do hybrid or partially in-person programs. So that's where we are. We would reassess that under the state guidelines if the new case rate was +2, went up by 2 out of 100,000, or the positivity rate was up a percentage point and a half within 2 weeks. So we, again, are really fortunate that we have this health advisory group and have the health department. So if there is a change in the infection rate, we can call in our health advisory group and consult with them. And we do that regularly. I mean, I talked to one of the members today about a question I had, and they pick up the phone and respond to us immediately. Dr. Duraza has been incredibly responsive. So she got on the phone with me at 8:00 a.m. the other day to discuss something and consult, as well as Dr. Adina Greenbaum, who's the head of infectious disease for the health department. So they've been just incredible partners for us and very responsive. Some of the health advisory team are City Schools parents, so they particularly feel invested in this and have been really great partners at helping to think through what they would want for their own children.
Allison, thanks a lot. And we're going to work to identify for our folks where we have those metrics on our website so we can point them to this. Thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Dr. Santelises, can you come back and join me on the floor? We've got a question about how we developed this process. Dr. Santelises, when developing our expansion of small group in-person learning, did we reach out to our bargaining units? You know, our unions. We have 3 of them, I believe. How did we work? Yeah, how did we work with them?
Or actually a little bit more than that. So I would say with our principal and administrators union, I not only get regular calls from Jimmy Giddings, who serves as the president, but we instituted at the executive board of Pizzazz's request regular meetings. So we've been having regular meetings with them. Matter of fact, some of the feedback we received from principals, we had a chance to share some of what we were thinking, actually helped inform the proposal. I would say with BTU, our team meets minimum once a week, sometimes once or twice a week with BTU, where they weigh in on various components and they present their ideas as well. And then, excuse me, with our other bargaining units, Local 44, we have actually had, frankly, a lot of earlier conversation with them because some of their members came back into buildings first. So a lot of our conversations with them have actually occurred, with their members actively in buildings. So we've been in ongoing conversations with them, even when we began this. So with regards to process and specifically the collective bargaining units, that's my answer on that one.
Great, thank you, Doc. We're going to move on to a different topic.
Sure.
Dr. Deborah Brooks, our ED for Special Education, can you come and join me on the floor?
Yes, good evening.
Good evening, Dr. Brooks. It's always good to see you. We have a question from an audience member about students with IEPs. Under the small group in-person learning option, does that mean that all students with IEPs or all students that are in a special education group, does this automatically mean that they're coming back?
So we are providing opportunities for students with disabilities, again, in small groups, our most vulnerable students, as we have some students that are currently participating in our student learning centers. We do have some students that are currently participating in-person opportunities currently right now with their teachers who have volunteered to provide some in-person instruction. And we will also be bringing back some small group of students with disabilities that are most vulnerable and can benefit from in-person learning. So as we continue to provide these small group learning opportunities, we will continue to invite back those students that are most vulnerable and can benefit most importantly from the in-person learning opportunities.
All right, stay with me, Dr. Brooks, because we had another question pop up about related service providers. In the small group in-person learning option, how will related service providers interact with students that maybe aren't in the same pod?
So if they're not in the same pod, what we will do is, again, make sure that we are practicing all safe and healthy protocols, so that we're not having related service providers work with multiple students outside of pods. So for some of those related service providers, we will look at different caseloads. Depending upon what the service nature need is, they may still provide telehealth if it's most appropriate to provide that for the students. And we will again make decisions based upon individual needs for students as well as staff to make sure that all are healthy and safe.
Thank you, Dr. Brooks. Succinct and clear, and I appreciate you. If I have any more questions in this vein, I'll come back to you. So let's see what we have. Again, there are a lot of questions tonight, a lot of really good ones. And I need to correct myself. We have 6 bargaining units here in city schools. Charge that to my head and not to my heart. Moving on. Let's see what I can bring forth. Chief Davis, can you come back to the forefront? We want to talk a little bit about when we have students in these small groups, will they just be sitting in a classroom still, or do you foresee that as we begin our planning? In general, do we have any idea at this point what that will look like?
Can you say the question one more time, Andre? Just what the classroom will look like? Is that what you're asking? What the movement will look like?
As far as kids? I think the person is asking, when students are in a classroom, what will they be doing?
I mean, we're going to try to make the instruction as similar as possible, given the distancing protocols and given the health concerns that we're going to follow. And what I would say is, right, we'll try to make sure that, and not try, we'll make sure that students don't move as much as possible. A lot of times, students might go to an art class, for instance. If we can keep the students in their normal class and bring the art teacher to them, we'll have to figure out what the right protocol is around that. But I think we want as less movement as possible. That might be harder at some of the older grades, right? Because they're used to moving classes. But a lot of times, especially in the 9th grade, for instance, we can keep some of the students there together. And I know we're not bringing back 9th graders right now, so it really depends on the situation. But we will want them to stay in their classroom just for health concerns as much as we possibly can. And when it gets down to, well, what's going to happen in the classroom, right? While we stay 6 feet apart, we'll still make sure that the curriculum is followed. There was a question earlier that you asked me, Andre, and I think the in-person opportunities will make sure that we're following the curriculum and giving a frankly more rigorous, rigorous situation to our students than in the virtual space. So I think there's some real positives there. I think there'll be a lot less small group where students come together and are real close, right? We won't be having that because in the end, that's not safe. So it will look different. It'll be probably a little bit more of the lecture style, but there are still things you can do to have students work together. You can still pair kids up, but you just can't put them as close together as they normally would. So I think we'll try to replicate as much as we possibly can, with health being the very first concern.
Right, Chief Davis, as a follow-up, we're seeing a lot of questions tonight about what will this look like in the classroom? What will another aspect of the classroom experience look like? Is it fair to say that there will be some variation from school to school based on, programs and options? Or are we going to see the same, consistent classrooms?
We want to be very consistent with our health protocols, right? That is something that in our student learning sites, and even if you go back to the summer, right, we did a real yeoman's work on making sure that the folks that were opening up schools and that were working with students knew those protocols, both when students come in, when they're transitioning, frankly, what the adults are doing in that space as well. And then also what happens within the classroom. So that consistency has got to be rock solid. There will probably be some programmatic changes from one school to another, but we're going to make sure that the development that we have and the training that we do around the safety protocols is as tight and consistent as we possibly can. That is number one. But yes, some school might have a different resource, or they might have some different programmatic aspect, STEM versus STEAM versus some arts program. So yes, those programmatic changes will still be aligned with what the student is used to in their school, but the consistency across the board with respect to our health protocols is top notch, and it is the first priority.
Thank you, Chief Davis. You even gave me a bonus one. I appreciate you. Dr. Santelises, I know you heard Chief Davis's response, and I believe you have something to add as well.
Yeah, no, and I think I would just emphasize what Chief Davis said about the consistency on the safety protocols, and wanted to add that one of the things I'm seeing as I'm out and on the ground is that as schools and our student learning centers actually become more familiar with the safety guidelines, the health protocols, what we're also seeing is schools taking advantage of outdoor space, of kids actually getting to go out and doing social distanced movement and communication activities. So part of the beauty of actually having this ongoing experience to build on is what we're beginning to see is ways for young people to engage while still remaining safe. So we've seen, for example, in a number of our ESOL classrooms that young people, even with masks and plexiglass, can actually respond to one another and interact. And I think that we have a lot of learning about the number of breaks that young people need, both virtually, but also in person. So just want to emphasize that one of the things that has been really beneficial about putting a lot of these in place is that you're beginning to see that, as Chief Davis absolutely said, there is a lot that's changed, but there is also a lot of creative work going on from teachers, from some of our partners who are back in schools, creative approaches to making sure kids have movement, that kids can still engage in individual activities. So that's the only piece I would just add, but I agree with what Chief Davis has also said.
All right, Doc, I have an unrelated follow-up, so don't go anywhere. Come on back. This will be a quick one.
I'm still here. I can go on. I'm not leaving, so I'm still here.
All righty. Are charter schools included in that, or do we think they'll be included in that group of 25?
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that has been really heartening is that when we looked at schools that were interested in voluntarily opening, we had a representative number of charter schools who were interested. I think the question will be in the coming weeks, what that looks like in terms of some of the actual planning, some of the family response at charter schools. And again, I go back to that earlier question. Right now, it will be really based on again, what's the demand, what's the interest from families in a particular school. But we have had we've had representative charter school interest all along the way.
All right, and Doc, I have another one. Well, when it comes to teachers returning, we have some teachers that will have to come back under this plan, and we're seeing a couple of questions tonight. They want to understand the process or the rationale. Can you speak just a little bit about how we got here and why we're making the choices we're making?
Sure. So one of the things that I said at Tuesday's board meeting, and actually received some individual emails from different staff, including some teachers, is that the real driver behind this is looking at what is happening to young people for which virtual learning is not working, for pre-K and K students whose families are frustrated, for students with disabilities who are just not able to get the support that they need virtually. The other piece within that is knowing that as we, and I was speaking to a principal today who actually believes that there are some staff that are ready to come back. And one of the things we know is that increasingly over time, we have brought back more staff gradually. And this is that phase in our work. It's why we're not saying open up the whole district in a month. It's why we're not saying, everybody return everywhere tomorrow. It's why we're starting with 25 schools, small groups, targeting particular groups of students that very much like we've been doing all along is steady and is measured. And we make sure that we can follow through on the safety protocols that we've promised. In some of the, with some of the teachers I've spoken to that actually have come back and other staff, one of the things that's been absolutely clear is that when they see the safety protocols in place, when they know that PPE is actually being provided for large portions of, frankly, all classifications of staff, there is greater comfort. What we will do, and Chief Grant Skinner couldn't be with us this evening, but we will have available for staff what some of those options are, so that I know that we have, some staff, whether they're teachers or frankly, whether they're custodians who are immune compromised. So part of what we are working on is how do we provide options, but knowing that the gradual, slow and steady, making sure that that the necessary health precautions are in place puts us in a good place to then have all kinds of staff reentering. And we have done that slowly, but we do have staff who've been in buildings for quite some time. So that's part of why we're starting slow. It's part of why we're being very deliberate. And it's part of why we have learned along the way. And frankly, some of the earlier staff that have already been in buildings have really helped us develop those protocols so that we can keep staff safe.
Thank you, Dr. Santelises. Now I'm going to call Dr. Lynette Washington. Come on back. We have a few more things to talk about. Hi again, Dr. Washington. As we're nearing the end of the show, we're about 4 minutes out. We've seen a couple of questions tonight related to our custodians and the number of cleaning supplies that we have. Let's go with the easy one. Dr. Washington, do we have enough cleaning supplies to handle this type of effort?
Yeah, so I would say that yes, we have enough cleaning supplies. One of the things that you mentioned on the front end was about all of the various supplies that we have been stockpiling in preparation for school openings. And I think that another piece that Dr. Santelises talked about was how we were slowly opening and phasing. And one of those things allows us to get a gauge of how much supplies that folks are going to need when we come back full scale. So my team will say that we have these 8 o'clock in the morning calls where we're looking at our inventory, we're assessing what people are using, how quickly they're using it, and then going back and making sure that we have this systems and process in place to continually replenish the inventory that's being used. So I will say yes. I am confident that we have enough supplies and that we're using this period of time to continue to gauge how much more supplies we will need as we open with all of our students coming back hybrid model.
All right. Dr. Washington, just as 2 follow-ups. Now that we know we have enough supplies, how are we training, just in a very general sense, our custodians to be able to operate in this environment as we're talking about bringing kids back in our buildings?
Right. And so we've developed training for our custodians. And so right now for the SLC sites, the student learning sites, we actually have on our team is a manager for custodian liaison. It's Quentin Woods, and he's been very vital player, key player on our team that has been helping us develop protocols and process for custodians, and then also training. So for the SLC sites, because there were a smaller number of sites, Mr. Woods went to every single one of the sites and actually walked the custodians through some additional training pieces that may be necessary for them to do cleaning. And then also we are doing training for our custodians too. Right now we have training that's going over 2 months to make sure that all of our custodians have access to the training. So whether they're using technology or they have to come in person, social distancing practices, we're also running that training too. And so that training started, I believe, last week. Where it's a little bit more of a deep dive around some of the things that are related to general safety, and then some specifics around COVID-related cleaning and management of our school facilities.
All right, Dr. Washington, thank you for joining us tonight. We've now reached the time for our last question, but it's not for you. It's for Dr. Deborah Brooks. Dr. Brooks, I need you to bring us home as we talk again about the experience for students in the special education program. Our final question of the evening: what will happen with SPED students who should have one-on-ones, but their home schools are not operating? Will they be eligible to attend another school?
So right now, as we have students who have additional adults identified on their IEPs, we are providing that support via the paraprofessionals as they have access to their devices. And we will work with those individual families to look at opportunities for those students to be able to have in-person opportunities. Again, we're looking and working with families on individual basis, but we will definitely provide options for those families as we do for all of our families of students with disabilities.
Dr. Brooks, as always, I appreciate you. And y'all check her out on our video on YouTube, where again, you're gonna see videos where we give you a glimpse inside of these buildings, whether it be Beachfield, Lakeland, and any of the other schools that we'll highlight in the coming days and weeks. I want you to watch how we clean, watch how the procedures that we have in place. Take a moment as well and visit our website, baltimorecityschools.org. On the front page, we have a big blue button where if you want to check out our health procedures, if you want to learn more about how we're keeping safe in those regulations, you take time to go there. We'll be happy to see you. We'll be updating it regularly. And finally, so for those of you on Twitter, there are more than 300 of you alone in that space tonight. Twitter apparently is having a massive outage right now, so you might have missed bits and pieces of our town hall. Visit YouTube, watch it in its entirety, and make sure you're getting all the information that you need as we continue to take this step, this crucial step, this important step, and the right step to making sure that we're taking care of our students. With that said, the hour is getting late. It is 6:46 p.m. I want to thank Dr. Sonia Santelises, our CEO, and our cadre of experts who popped in and out as we had different questions. Dr. Santelises, you want to take us home before we say goodbye, or do you just want to wave?
I will do both and just say a big thank you to the team for being here and answering questions. And thank you again, as always, Andre, just for your expert facilitation. And really thank the public, families, for logging in tonight, everyone across the community who logged in tonight to be part of this. Your questions help make us better. And again, this plan is to just continue with our slow and steady learning to safely provide high quality options for families so that all families have options. So thank you very much. And I would just tell everybody have a fantastic night.
Thank you, Dr. Santelises, especially for emphasizing options. If you don't leave with any other message tonight, small group, in-person learning, those are options, and families can opt in or opt out. Well, it's been a pleasure to speak with you tonight. I am Andre Riley, your Director of Communications for Baltimore City Public Schools from my office here at North Avenue. Y'all be safe, and we'll see you before long. Have a great evening.